I would like to start off by thanking our sponsors for the evening. Firstly, the IPCI, for helping arranging the debate and also giving us Mr. Yusuf Ismail as the Muslim apologist, and then Antwoord Apologetic Ministries for inviting Dr. Craig and also for helping to arrange the debate this evening. If you would like to order a DVD of the debate, just give us your information. There is a man, Simon, going around giving the pamphlets out, so you can just write your information on the pamphlet and then just give it to us. If you walk outside, you'll see there is a box over there. You can just drop it in there. If you are here in an IPCI, with the IPCI, you can just order it through them. If you would like to order the debate through Antwoord Ministries, you can just drop us a note in the box. The moderator for this evening will stress this, but it just turns out into a circus as soon as we applaud whilst the debaters are making their presentation and making their case. So if you would like to show your appreciation, please just leave that for after they have finished, and then you can clap as loud as you want to. But let's not shout things out, let's keep it civilized, and let's not give Mr. Smythe, who would be the moderator for this evening, a hard time with regards to controlling the crowd. Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce our moderator for the evening. Now, he is Mr. John Smythe, apparently not Smith or Smith like the two national captains. He's John Smythe, and he practiced law as a barrister for many years in Britain, and at the age of 37 he was appointed to the Queen's Council. He sat as a part-time judge for 5 years, and part of his practice was to conduct constitutional matters and parliamentary drafting. In 1984, Mr. Smythe was invited to Australia to assist Parliament with drafting the legislation to restrict video pornography and gratuitous violence. And after running a mission in Zimbabwe for 17 years, John and his wife Anne have made their home in South Africa. John has been involved with moral issues in Parliament, the courts and media for 5 years now. He has a proven track record, having addressed the Constitutional Court in person and as architect and author of successful challenge to Parliament by Doctors of Full Life in respect of the Abortion Amendment Bill of 2004. John writes, he lectures and frequently appears on radio and television. Please welcome our moderator for the evening, Mr. John Smythe. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Johan, for your kind introduction. I can add my welcome to Johan's. Thank you for being here tonight on this very important, stimulating occasion, as I'm sure it's going to be. Saturday night has many other attractions. The Stormers are playing the Sharks. The Proteas are playing England, but you're here for something much more important, and that's tremendous. I'm delighted to be your moderator tonight. In a moment, I'm going to introduce to you our two distinguished guests who will be the lead protagonists in this debate. But before I do so, I want to stress that this is a debate in which I hope your participation from the floor a little later on will be as meaningful as the speeches from Professor Craig and Mr. Ismail. Do feel free to take notes. Do be ready with your questions. Your time will come. Our two lead debaters will, of course, not be giving lectures, even less preaching sermons. Their task is to lay the foundation for all of us to debate and consider this vitally important topic by identifying the issues and providing evidence for facts which may be in issue. And of course, ladies and gentlemen, you are judge and jury. Remember that. As you listen to these two eminent men, as you debate the issue from the floor, your goal is to decide where the truth lies. In a postmodern age where relativism prevails, truth is a precious commodity. We're dealing with life-changing issues tonight. We must put our prejudices aside and seek truth tonight. The man Jesus, who's the topic of our debate, we're seeking to identify him in this debate. He claimed, according to the New Testament records, to be the way, the truth, and the life. Did he say it? Did he mean it? Was he mad? Was he a con man? Or was he actually speaking the truth? Those are some of the issues which we're going to debate tonight. And my task as moderator is simply to ensure an informative, lively, fast-moving, succinct debate. Now here's the format. Dr. Craig will begin in a moment when I've introduced him with an opening statement of a maximum of 30 minutes. We've asked both the main speakers to be less if they can. Mr. Ismail will follow with a maximum of 30 minutes, his first statement. I remind you, please, during those statements, don't applaud. There will be plenty of time for applause later. And then we shall have a first rebuttal from each speaker and a second rebuttal from each speaker, and then a very short closing statement from each of our lead debaters. At that point, we'll have a short break. We'll have been going for an hour and a half or so, and we'll need a break. And then, in the second part of the debate, we will have questions from the floor, and I'll tell you more about the format for that in due course. Now, may I introduce, first of all, Dr. William Lane Craig. He's our overseas guest from America. He's research professor of philosophy at Talbot School of Theology in La Mirada, California. He earned a doctorate in philosophy at the University of Birmingham, England, before taking a doctorate in theology from the University of Munich in Germany. He's a popular international lecturer on university campuses. He has authored or edited over 30 books, including his signature work, Reasonable Faith, as well as over 100 articles in professional journals of philosophy and theology. Many of his articles and debates are available online, williamlanecraig.com. Should be able to remember that. I'm going to introduce Yusuf Ismail at this point also, although he will be coming second. Dr. Craig begins simply because he is proposing the motion that Jesus is both man and God. Yusuf Ismail earned a BCom law degree from the University of Durban in Westville and received his LLB degree at the University of Natal. He was an advocate for a short period, then went back to the sidebar, and he is now a practicing attorney. Mr. Ismail is also a part-time lecturer in law at UNISA. He is heading the Interfaith Department of the Islamic Propagation Center International on a part-time basis. Here he is primarily involved in discussions focusing on the relevancy of Christianity and Islam in the modern world, discussions on Christian-Muslim relations in postmodern society, and the challenges of secularism in the 21st century. Wow. Mr. Ismail has engaged in regular debates on theological issues with a number of leading Christian figures in South Africa, such as Dr. David Seckham, Pastor Glenn Schenkt, and Bob Benjamin, and Dr. Alan Prophet. Last year, he was instrumental in setting up and coordinating a series of debates between Shabir Ali from Toronto and leading Christian apologist in South Africa, John Gilchrist. Over then to Dr. Craig for his opening statement. Please welcome Dr. Craig.
Thank you, and good evening. I want to begin by saying how excited my wife Jan and I are to be here in South Africa. We have so enjoyed the beauty of the Cape, as well as your warmth and hospitality in receiving us. And I'm also very glad to have the opportunity to discuss this very important question this evening with Mr. Ismail. Both Christianity and Islam have an exalted place for Jesus of Nazareth. Muslims are rightly offended by the secular attacks upon Jesus, which one finds upon the websites of so-called internet infidels, and that's their own self-description. These websites popularize the claim that Jesus was just a mythological figure who never really even existed, that he was not born of the Virgin Mary, this idea being derived from pagan mythology, that he never performed miracles, and that he never claimed to be the Messiah. The Muslim, like the Christian, rightly finds these scurrilous claims to be simply offensive because the Quran, as well as the New Testament, explicitly teaches that Jesus was the greatest of all the prophets who had ever lived, that he was miraculously conceived and born of the Virgin Mary, that he himself performed miracles, that he healed the blind, cleansed lepers and raised the dead, and that he was indeed the Messiah. But it's not just that these claims are insulting to Jesus. The more important point is that they are based upon pseudo-scholarship, which is more than 100 years out of date. Contemporary studies of the historical Jesus have come to recognize that pagan mythology is simply the wrong interpretive context for understanding Jesus. Jesus was born and lived in the religion of the Hebrew Bible, and it is in that context that he is to be properly understood. This realization has led to what New Testament scholar Craig Evans has called the eclipse of mythology in Life of Jesus research. He says that mythology is no longer seen as a relevant category in Life of Jesus research today. And what you'll notice about these infidel websites is that they almost never cite the primary sources of pagan mythology to support their claims that the Gospels were drawn from pagan myths. And it's no wonder, because when you do read the primary sources, you find that they're not really parallel to the Gospels at all, and that all of the supposed parallels are concocted and spurious. So, the next time someone comes to you claiming that the story of Jesus is based upon pagan myths, you can be sure that that person is either a charlatan or else a pseudo-scholar who is hopelessly out of date. But while Islam and Christianity both have an exalted place for Jesus, nevertheless, there does remain this huge difference between them. Muslims regard Jesus as merely human, whereas Christians believe that Jesus was both human and divine. Now, it's important that the Christian claim here be properly understood, or confusion will be inevitable. Christians believe that Jesus was truly human, but they do not believe that he was merely human. Christians believe that Jesus had two natures, a human nature and a divine nature. In his human nature, Jesus experienced all of the inherent limitations of humanity, being limited in time and space, being limited in physical strength and knowledge, feeling exhaustion, hunger, and pain, being mortal. I find that Muslims often don't understand this. They think that if you show passages from the Gospels which display Jesus' true humanity, such as his limited knowledge or his physical limitations, then you've thereby proved that he's not also divine, when in fact all you've proved is that he is truly human, which Christians agree with. Thus, you cannot refute the Christian position by demonstrating the humanity of Jesus, because Christians believe that Jesus was truly human. The question before us this evening is not, Jesus, is he man or God? But rather the question is, Jesus, is he man or both God and man? To refute the Christian position, the Muslim theologian needs to show that Jesus had only one nature, a human nature. On the other hand, the Christian theologian, in order to establish his position, needs to give some good reason for thinking that Jesus had not only a human nature, but also a divine nature. The problem we face is how to settle this dispute. For the Gospels say one thing and the Quran says another. The Gospels portray Jesus as both human and divine. The Quran insists that he was merely human. So, who's right? Since both Christians and Muslims regard their sacred scriptures as the Word of God, and therefore true, we seem to have a standoff here. Is there some way that we can get past this standoff? Well, fortunately, there is. Since Jesus was a real historical person, we can break the deadlock by examining the historical credibility of these contrasting pictures of Jesus. In other words, the search for the historical Jesus can help to resolve the disagreement between Christianity and Islam. Now, in order to determine who the historical Jesus really was, we need to have some objective criteria for assessing our sources. Professor John Meyer, an eminent New Testament historian, lists the following 5 criteria. 1, multiple independent sources. Events which are reported in independent and especially early sources are likely to be historical. 2, dissimilarity. If a saying or event is different from prior Judaism and also from later Christianity, then it probably doesn't derive from either one and so belongs to the historical Jesus. 3, embarrassment. Sayings or events that would have been embarrassing or difficult for the Christian church are unlikely to have been invented and so are likely historical. 4, rejection and execution. Jesus' crucifixion is so indisputably established as an anchor point in history that words and deeds of Jesus must be assessed in terms of their likelihood of leading to his execution as King of the Jews. A bland Jesus who just preached monotheism, which was already accepted by the Jews of his day, would never have provoked such opposition. And finally, number 5, coherence. Once we've established a body of facts, then other events can be assessed by how well they fit in with the established picture. Now, when we apply such criteria to the New Testament, we're able to establish a good deal about the historical Jesus. In tonight's debate, I want to discuss just 3 of the facts that emerge about this remarkable person. Number 1, Jesus' radical self-concept. The Quran says that Jesus thought of himself as no more than a human prophet who told people to worship the one true God. However, on the basis of the criteria, it can be shown that among the historically authentic words of Jesus are claims which reveal his divine self-understanding. Tonight, I want to look at just 2 of these. First of all, Jesus claimed to be the Son of Man. The criteria of multiple independent sources and of dissimilarity shows that this claim belongs to the historical Jesus. Now, most lay people probably think that this title refers to Jesus' humanity, just as the title Son of God refers to his deity. But that's a mistake. It fails to take into account the Old Testament background of the expression. In the book of Daniel, chapter 7, Daniel sees a vision of a divine human figure, a Son of Man, coming on the clouds of heaven, to whom God will give everlasting authority, glory, and dominion. No mere human being could be accorded such a status, for this would be to commit the sin which Muslims call shirk, which is giving something which properly belongs to God alone to somebody else. Yet, this is the status which Jesus claimed for himself. Probably the most famous Son of Man saying by Jesus comes at his trial before the Jewish high priest, and I quote, "Then the high priest stood up and asked Jesus, 'Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?' 'I am,' said Jesus, 'and you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven.' The high priest tore his clothes. 'You have heard the blasphemy. What do you think?' And they all condemned him as worthy of death." Every Muslim would have to agree with the high priest and the council that Jesus is a blasphemer who is worthy of death because he has made himself equal to God. Secondly, not only did Jesus claim to be the Son of Man, but he also thought of himself as the unique Son of God. This is a claim that Jesus often makes in the Gospels. We'll look at just 3 examples. First, Jesus' self-understanding as God's unique Son comes to expression in his parable of the wicked tenants of the vineyard. Even radical, skeptical critics, like those in the so-called Jesus Seminar, recognize the authenticity of this parable. In this parable, the vineyard symbolizes Israel. The owner of the vineyard is God. The tenants are the Jewish religious leaders, and the servants are the prophets sent by God. In Mark 12, 1-9, Jesus says, "A man planted a vineyard and rented it to some farmers. At harvest time, he sent a servant to the tenants to collect from them some of the fruit of the vineyard. But they seized him, beat him, and sent him away empty-handed. Then he sent another servant to them. They struck this man on the head and treated him shamefully. He sent still another, and that one they killed. He sent many others. Some of them they beat, others they killed. He had one left to send, a son whom he loved. He sent him last of all, saying, 'They will respect my son.' But the tenants said to one another, 'This is the heir. Come, let's kill him, and the inheritance will be ours.' So they took him and killed him." Now, what does this parable tell us about Jesus' self-understanding? It tells us that Jesus thought of himself as God's only beloved son, distinct from all the prophets, God's final messenger, and even the heir to Israel. Even the Muslim apologist Shabir Ali admits, and I quote, "The son obviously represents Jesus, whom God sent last of all. So Jesus is shown to be different from the prophets. He is not one of the servants. He is a beloved son." Even this is an understatement. In the parable, Jesus describes himself as God's only beloved son. Jesus did not think of himself as merely another human prophet. Second, Jesus' self-concept as God's special son comes to explicit expression in Matthew 11:27. "All things have been committed to me by my Father. No one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son and those to whom the Son chooses to reveal him." It's unlikely that the church invented this saying because it says that the Son is unknowable. No one knows the Son except the Father. But in the thinking of the early church, we can know the Son. So by the criterion of dissimilarity, this saying is authentic. But what does this saying tell us about Jesus' self-concept? It tells us that he thought of himself as the exclusive Son of God